So once we are in our project folder here, I'm gonna start by creating my first module or a folder called modules. So I create this folder called modules in my project folder. Then I create another folder called VPC in the same project folder. So I'll name this VPC. Now inside of my VPC folder, I'll create my variables.tf as well as my main.tf and also my outputs.tf. Now outside of my modules folder, I'm gonna go ahead and create a supplementary file called reference. I'll have that in all caps. Hang on. .tf, and basically here I'm gonna post the references I found on Terraform, so you don't have to go searching for these references. I created a folder where I'm gonna have all the references in one place, and that way it's gonna be easier for whoever's following along to download this reference folder and just edit it in such a way that works perfectly with your project. So now I'm just gonna move this variables file to the side here, and I'm gonna create a variable. I'll call it region. I'm just gonna take away the descriptions for now. So once we are actually doing the project, we can input our own descriptions. And then I'm just gonna copy and paste it and change this name from region to project name. I'm gonna open that reference file, and then I'll paste the reference that I created earlier in it. And then I'll do the same thing with in the main.tf. I just did that reference file just so I can commit it to source control, so whoever wants it can download it without it being edited yet. That's pretty much why I created this reference. So I'm gonna save it and exit out. So we're currently in our main.tf, and this is where we're actually gonna start working on our project. So yeah, let's get into it. So the first argument we have here is obviously to create a VPC. I've named it VPC for obvious reasons, and I'm gonna go ahead and create a variable for the title block. So if I type V, obviously it gets auto suggest, and then I'll just create title block, leave everything as default with no descriptions in it. There we go. And then back over here to main.tf, I'm just gonna reference it. And the way you reference something within Terraform is you type in var, and then obviously we're getting this suggested value here, which is title block, and that's what we're trying to reference. So I'll just go ahead and click on that. And the reason why you always want to click on the suggestions is just so you don't make any typing errors or typos. So the next argument we have here is instance tenancy, and I'm just gonna type default in double quotes. And then it's asking to enable DNS host names, for which we're gonna state true. And then this next argument here is asking for tags. So we're gonna name this according to our naming convention, which is gonna be var dot, and then we're gonna use this project name. So we're gonna do project name. Next, we will create an internet gateway and attach it to the VPC. So the first argument we have here is VPC ID, and obviously it's this VPC which we created earlier up here. So what we need to do here is just copy the resource ID and name and paste it right here and type .id at the very end and make sure to take out the quote and add a period. And then the next argument is tags, and which is requiring a name, and it's going to be the same name. The reason why we keep tagging it with this project name is such that it reads the project name and then the name of the resource in which we are currently creating. So for example, now I just copied the var, the project name. Oops, I'll just copy from here. Type var dot, paste it, project name. So it's gonna read our project name IGW, which stands for Internet Gateway. So the next thing we have to do here is use data source to get a list of all the availability zones within our region. So this is basically what we're trying to achieve with this statement here. And then moving on, we're gonna create a public subnet AZ1. And for this, I've named it public subnet AZ1. And obviously that's the resource that comes with Terraform. So first it's asking for VPC ID. And if you remember, we had created our VPC up here. So I'm just gonna copy the VPC ID from right here, line 14. And I'll paste it here. And then it's asking for a CIDR block, which I'm gonna create a variable for it. So I'm gonna come here and say variable, press enter, and I'll call it public. Oh, sorry, I can't type today. Public. Oh my gosh. Subnet AZ1 CIDR. As you can see, I'm getting recommendation to IDR. And then I'm just gonna close the parentheses right here with no descriptions. And then back to a main, I'm just gonna reference this. So I'm gonna do var dot public subnet AZ1 CIDR. And then next is asking for availability zone, which I'm gonna, because we earlier on we stated that we were gonna use data source to get a list of all the available zones in the region. So what I'm gonna do here is I'm gonna copy this argument and I'll paste it down here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take away the quotes here. I'll add a period, and I'll take away the curly braces. I'll put a dot names, and then in square brackets I'm gonna add a 0. And obviously, you know, in programming we start counting from 0, so basically 0 means 1. So I'm choosing the first availability zone within our region by stating 0 here. And then I'm just gonna take away these two quotes and add a period right there. So it should read data.aws availability zones dot available zone dot names, and then in square braces, square brackets, add a 0, which means choose the first availability zone within that region. And then because we are in public subnet, it's asking us if we want to map public IP on launch, for which we're going to type true. And then the next argument is tags, for which it's asking for a name. So as you can see, it's already giving me a recommendation here. So var dot project name public subnet AZ1. So next we're gonna create public subnet AZ2, and you can see I've named it public subnet AZ2. It's requesting a VPC ID, which we earlier stated um, right here on line 26. So easy, just copy that and paste it. It's asking for a CIDR block, for which we're going to create another variable. So just copy this early variable for public CIDR AZ1, public subnet AZ1 CIDR, and then just paste it below, and then change the name from AZ1 to AZ2. And then here you just reference it as var dot, and you make sure you select the correct one, which is public subnet AZ2, because that's what we're currently working on. The next is requesting for an availability zone. So remember, in public subnet AZ1, we created it and we stated 0, meaning choose the first available zone within that region. Here we're going to do the same thing, but we'll choose 1, which means select the next availability zone, which is the second availability zone within that region. So we're just going to change this to a 1. And then because we're in a public subnet, AZ2 is asking if to map public IP on launch, for which we're going to state true, the Boolean value of true, so no quotation marks are required. And then the name, which is like we did up here, we're going to call it public subnet AZ2. So we're going to type public subnet AZ2. So next, we're going to create a route table and add a public route to it. So the first argument it's asking for is a VPC ID, which we have referenced a couple of times now. So if I scroll up to line 38, I can just copy that VPC ID and paste it. The next argument, it's a CIDR block, and it says the type is a string. So in quotes, because we are trying to route traffic to anywhere on the internet, the way to reference that is 0.0.0.0/0, which basically means route traffic to anywhere on the internet. And for that, it's requiring a gateway ID, which is an internet gateway ID, which we created up here on line 12. So what I'm going to do is I'll copy that internet gateway name, resource name. And if I scroll back down to line 54, I can paste it, and then I can add the ID. I take away these quotes, add a period, and it should read AWS Internet Gateway .internetgateway.id. And then the next argument it requires is a name, which I'm gonna write in quotes, public route table. So the next thing we have to do here is associate the public subnet AZ1 to public route table. Here's the resource type and the reference name I've given it, public subnet AZ1 route table association. And the first argument it requires is a subnet ID. So because we're trying to associate the subnet AZ1 to the public route table, if you remember, we created the public subnet AZ1 up here. So what we have to do here is copy this resource name, scroll down, paste it, and just like we've done a couple times now, we add a .id at the end, take away the quotation marks, add a period, and it should read AWS subnet dot public subnet az1 dot id. And then the route table in which we're trying to associate that subnet to is what we just created up here. So what we have to do is just copy this and paste it and pretty much do the same thing we just did. So we add a period, and here we add a period at ID. So it should read AWS route table dot public route table dot ID. And we have to repeat the process with public subnet AZ2. So because we know we have a naming convention and nothing changes but the numbers, so here we can just copy and paste and change this from AZ1 to AZ2, and then copy the same because we're associating the same route table to public subnet AZ2 as well. So we're writing traffic through the same route table, and we just paste that up here, and that we should be good to go for that. So the next thing we have to create here is a private app subnet AZ1, and here's the resource type and the reference name I've given it. So the first argument here is VPC ID, and we've referenced this ID a couple times now. So what we're gonna do is scroll up a little bit, and then we find it, and then we can copy it, scroll back down, and paste it. The next argument is CIDR block, for which I'm gonna create a variable for this. So I'm gonna type variable, and I'll call it private app subnet az1 underscore CIDR. And then here in this argument for CIDR block, I'll reference that variable, the private app subnet az1 CIDR. I'll reference that. And then the next argument here is availability zone. And because we're trying to create this in the first availability zone using data source, we're gonna scroll up and copy this right here. Don't forget the one that ends with a 0 and not a 1, because we're choosing the first availability zone within that region. And then we're gonna paste it right here. And then the next argument is map public IP on launch. As you can see, it's of type Boolean, so we're gonna type false with no quotes. And then the name, we can call it private app subnet az1. Moving on, we're gonna create a private app subnet az2. The arguments will be pretty similar to the private app subnet az1 we just created. So it would be a lot of copying and pasting. So I'm gonna copy the VPC ID for the first argument and paste it. The next argument is requiring a CIDR block, so I'm gonna create a variable for it. So I'll just copy that, paste it, and then change the AZ1 to AZ2 CIDR, and then I'll copy it, and I'm gonna reference it here with a variable. So var dot, and then I'll paste that. Oh, hold on 1 second. The next ID is availability zone, because we're doing in AZ2, so we can copy this. Rather, I should copy this and paste it here. Map public IP on launch, again, because we're creating this in the private subnet, we're gonna type false. And then for the name, we're gonna tag it private app subnet az2 in quotes. So moving on, we're gonna create a private data subnet in the first availability zone. Here's the resource type and the reference name I've given it. The first argument it requires again is the VPC ID for which we have referenced here. So I'll copy the VPC ID and paste it. And then it's requiring a starter block for which I'm gonna create a variable for it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this variable, paste it here, and then I'll change app to data, and then I'll change 2 to 1. So it should read private data subnet AZ1 CIDR. And then here I can reference it. So var dot private, maybe I should just copy it. And paste it. So it should read var.private data subnet AZ1 CIDR. The next argument is the availability zone. Because we're doing it in AZ1, we're gonna copy this right here with the 0 at the end. The index should say 0. So we're gonna paste that. The next is map public IP on launch. Because this is a private data subnet, we're not gonna map it, so the value should be false. The next tags, which is name, we're gonna call it private data subnet AZ1. So next, we're gonna create a private data subnet in the second availability zone. And here's the resource type and the reference name I've given it. So the first argument is VPC ID. So we're just gonna copy the VPC ID from line 100 and paste it. CIDR block, we're gonna create another variable for it. So I'm gonna copy this. And paste it below. And instead of calling it AZ1, I'm gonna change 1 to 2. And then I'll copy the variable name, and then I'll reference it here by pasting var dot private data subnet AZ2, which is gonna be this one, CIDR. Next, availability zone, because we're gonna be working in the second availability zone, so we have to copy the one that says 1 in the index. So we're gonna copy this value here and fill it right here. The next argument says map public IP on launch. We do not want that, so we're gonna type false for the value. The next argument is tags, and the name we're gonna call it private data subnet AZ2. And so with this, we are currently done with main.tf. So moving on, we're gonna work on exporting values within our output.tf file. So in order to do that, I'm just gonna click here where I have my variables, and I'm gonna open the outputs.tf. And the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna type the keyword output, and then the first thing I'm gonna output is the region. So I'm gonna type region right there, and then for value, I'll type value. Oh, excuse me. And because we have our value in our variables folder here, our region in our variables folder here, it's suggesting var.region, which is exactly what we're gonna do. So we're gonna give a space, type var.region. And then I'm just gonna copy this syntax and paste it. The next thing I'm gonna want to export output is our project name. So I'm gonna type project underscore name. And for value, I'm gonna leave that var. And because I have the project name in our variable.tf file here, I'm just gonna copy that and output that name, var the project name. So the next thing I'm gonna want to output here is gonna be our VPC ID, and I'm gonna call it VPC ID, of course. VPC underscore ID, and for the value, I'm gonna delete this all the way to variable or to var, and I'm gonna find the name of VPC ID. So we've been calling it AWS underscore VPC dot VPC dot ID. So I'm gonna copy that and then I'll paste it. So now moving on, the next thing we're gonna output is gonna be our public subnet in AZ1, its ID. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna copy this like we've been doing, and I'm gonna paste it right here, and I'm gonna name it public subnet AZ1 ID. So underscore ID, and then for the value, I'll go up to where we created our subnet, which is gonna be here, right here. It says create subnet in public subnet AZ1. So I'm just gonna copy this, and then I'll paste it here, and then I'll take this away, add a period, go over to the end, add another period, and press .id. And then we're gonna do the same with the public subnet in the second availability zone. So that's pretty easy. I'll just copy this syntax, go over to the next line, paste it, and just modify it. AZ2. Like I said, I made an error right here. So it's the 1, and that's gonna be a 2. .id. And that's how you output the values for your subnets in the AZ1 and AZ2. So moving on, the next thing we're going to output here is going to be our private app subnet in the first availability zone. So like we've been doing, I'm just going to copy the output syntax, I'll paste it, and then modify it. So here, I'll take this away. I'll begin to type private, and it's giving me this suggestion, so I'll click on that, and then I'll just add underscore ID. So I'm gonna call it private app subnet AZ1 ID, and for the value, I'm gonna go over to my main.tf and find where I created the private app subnet in the first availability zone, and then I'm gonna copy the value right here, and then I'll paste it. I'll paste it right here, and then I'll take away the quotes, and it's gonna read AWS subnet dot private app subnet underscore AZ1 dot ID. So moving on, the next thing we're gonna output is gonna be the private app subnet in AZ2. So I'll copy that same syntax like we've been doing, and then I'll modify it to say AZ2, and then pretty much modify it down here to say AZ2 as well. And then we're gonna reference or output the private data subnet in AZ1 and the private data subnet in AZ2. So I'm just gonna quickly do that by copying the output and pasting it, and then modifying the name. So I'm gonna call it private data subnet AZ1 ID. So I'll change the app to data AZ1 and then I'll go over to my main.tf and scroll down to where I created the private data subnet in AZ1, which is right here. And then I'll copy the reference ID and the resource name. And then I'll modify it right here. And I'll take away the quotes, add a period, and it should read AWS subnet dot private data subnet AZ1.id. And then I'll reference the private data subnet in the second availability zone, or I'll output rather, and then I'll just change the name to AZ2 and AZ2 as well. The next resource we're gonna output is gonna be the internet gateway. So with that being said, I'm gonna output and I'll call it internet gateway. So I'll type internet, so right here, internet gateway. And for the value, I'm gonna go over to the main.tf and find out where I created the internet gateway, which is gonna be right here. So I'm gonna copy the resource name and the reference ID. I'm gonna copy that, and over here in my output.tf, I'll paste it, and then I'll take away the quotes and add a period. And we're not gonna do .id at the end because we're just referencing the internet gateway. So I'm gonna save our work. This is everything we need to create our VPC module. The next thing I'm gonna do, obviously, is, like I said, save everything. So I'll go to File, and then click on Save All, and then I'll create another folder out here, and I'm gonna call it PCI-DSS. I'll do it in caps. And in this folder, I'll create our backend.tf. So I'll create a new file. I'll call it backend. I'm just gonna close everything. I'll close this as well, and the README. And I already created everything that we need for the backend. So this is everything that we need to start our backend in AWS. So previously I created a bucket in my AWS console. So I'm just gonna fill in this information right here. So for the bucket, it's gonna be this bucket right here. So I'm just gonna copy that, and then I'll go back to VS Code and paste it. And then the next thing it's asking for is key. I'm just gonna correctly do the right syntax. And for the key, I'm just gonna call it PCI-DSS state. And for the region, I'm gonna do US East 2. Let's go East _2. And the profile, it's gonna be my IAM profile in AWS. So Alvin, pretty much my name. And then I'll paste it right here. And then I'm just gonna put them in quotes. And I'll do the same for the profile. And then I'm gonna save the file. I'm just gonna do save all. Moving on, in the same PCI-DSS folder right here, I'm gonna create a new file, and I'm gonna type in variables.tf. Let's make sure my spelling is correct. And then basically I'm just gonna copy the same variables that I had before. in my VPC module. So if I just drag this over here, there we go. And then I can copy it and I can paste it in the correct folder where I want it at. And then I'll just go ahead and save it. Save everything. So moving on, I'm just gonna close these for now. And then back in here in our PCI-DSS, I'm gonna create a new file and I'm gonna call it main.tf. In this file, this is where we're gonna use, this is which file we're gonna use to reference our VPC module that we created over here in modules slash VPC. So in here in our main.tf, the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna add a note, pretty much to configure our AWS profile, just letting your teammates know what's going on. And the first argument that we're gonna do is we're gonna type in a provider, which is gonna be AWS, as you can see. And then we're gonna add in the default region. And then we're gonna reference our region, which is var.region. And then for the profile, we're gonna reference my AWS profile, which is right here. So moving on, I'm going to type a note here just to let us know what we're doing. So it's basically, I'm gonna create the VPC module and press enter. So the first thing we're gonna do is we have to type module. So it provides us with the syntax. And for the name, I'm gonna call it VPC. It's pretty self-explanatory. You always wanna call your module pretty much what you're creating. That's just rule of thumb that I use. And then the first argument is gonna be source. So basically it's saying where do I get the properties for the VPC that I'm creating. And the source is gonna be located 2 directories back in a folder called modules, so this folder. So the reference 2 directories back, we're gonna do 2 dots. And it's giving me a suggestion right here, so it's gonna be this directory right here. I'm having a little syntax error. I think it's because I'm not properly indented. I wonder why. It's giving me this error here just because I haven't specified all the arguments. So once I specify these arguments, then that error should go away. So in order to specify my argument, I'm gonna open my variables.tf. Actually, I should split the screen. So I'm gonna open it right here. And then I'm just gonna copy everything. So probably indented on the source. I'm gonna paste it right here. And then I'll just clean it up so we get rid of all the errors. So I'm just gonna find variable and 2 quotes, copy, and then paste it in here. And I'm gonna replace it with nothing. So I'm just gonna press enter. I'll do that for all of them. And then for the quote and the curly braces, I'm gonna find it all as well. I'm gonna replace it with a space and the equal to. So now I'm just gonna start filling out the values for every argument. So region is gonna be var.region. Project name will be var.project name. I'm just gonna use autocomplete for most of them. VPC CIDR will be var.vpc CIDR, and so on and so forth. So I'm just gonna do this var.public subnet AZ one-sider. I'm gonna move on to var dot public subnet AZ two-sider var dot private app subnet AZ one-sider. So I'm gonna copy this. This might be much easier. AZ two-sider. And then I'm gonna save it. So once we've done this, the next thing we have to do is create a new file in our project folder here, PCI-DSS, called Terraform.tf-vars. Press enter. And in this file, this is where we're gonna input the values for every variable. So basically, I'm just gonna do this so we have a view. So every variable we have here, we're gonna input the actual values for each variable in the terraform.tf-vars file. So for example, region, we're gonna state what region. Project name, we're gonna state what our project name is, and so on and so forth. So let's get to it. So I'm just gonna paste this. I already copied these one by one and edited it, so I can just paste it here and we're good to go. So for region, our region is gonna be US East 2. For project name, I'm gonna call it PCI underscore DSS underscore compliant VPC. And for VPC CIDR, we're gonna input 10.0.0.0/16. For public subnet AZ1 CIDR, we're gonna input 10.0.0.0/24. For public subnet AZ2 CIDR, we're gonna do 10.0.1.0/24. So what I'm gonna do from here on out is I'm gonna copy this value and I'll paste it and I'll just edit it out. So this would be .2, .3, .4, and .5. Okay, now moving on, what I'm gonna do is I'm going to close this variables.tf file, and I'm actually gonna close every file we currently have open. And then right here in my project file, I'm just gonna right click on my main.tf and I'm gonna click on open in integrated terminal. And then once the terminal is open right here, I'm gonna initialize my AWS environment with Terraform. So I'm gonna type Terraform in it. So Terraform is gonna start initializing. And as you can see here, it says Terraform has been successfully initialized. And then I'm gonna type Terraform plan and give it a second. And as you can see, it's pretty much showing you every resource that we've created and how it's gonna be applied onto your AWS environment. And then from here, as you can see, it's saying plan 11 to add, 0 to change, and 0 to destroy. and then I'm gonna type Terraform apply, and it's basically saying for me to type yes so we can go ahead with the apply. So I'm gonna type yes, and now it's currently creating every resource that we've stated um, on our profile here, on our Visual Studio Code, our environment here, on to our AWS environment. And once it completes that, I'm just gonna give you a walkthrough of everything that it's created so far. So all we're gonna do is just wait until it creates. And as you can see, it says here, apply complete, resources 11 added, 0 changed, and 0 destroyed. So I'm just gonna go onto the AWS environment and show you a representation of everything that we've created on so far. So if I type VPC here and go into the VPC console, and I'm just gonna filter by VPC. As you can see, this one is what we just created, the PCI DSS compliant VPC. So I'm just gonna click on that, and then I'll click on VPCs, and as you can see, here it is. So I'm gonna click on this VPC ID here, and as you can see, here are all the subnets that we created in our code, and here's the CIDRs that we give them.